Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to my video on configuring previous and next command buttons on user forms in Microsoft Excel. So I have here a Microsoft Excel workbook with a couple worksheets, and I have a set of data that's fictitious here. Column A is participants, and column B is pretest with some scores, and then column C is post-test with some scores. And I've created a basic user form that's activated by clicking this blue rectangle here, which displays the ID number of a participant and the corresponding pretest score, and it allows you to use a previous and next button to scroll through the ID numbers. So fairly straightforward. So I'm going to show you how to build what I've built here from scratch. So first I need to show you some of the components of this particular workbook that you'll need to have in place to complete this project. I have two dynamic named ranges that are constructed. One is named participants. You can see that's the formula for it down there, and the other is named all data, and that's the formula for all data. All data contains all the values from the first participant to the last and out all the way through the pretest and post-test, and the participants dynamic name range contains from the first ID number to the last. These are called dynamic named ranges, and I have another video which covers how to build these. Another element I want to review is the storage worksheet. Now, there's a lot of different ways to accomplish what I built, that small user form, but I'm storing values here on a separate worksheet because it makes it easier to understand what I'm doing as I'm building it and how it works. So I'll start with current row. I have a value here, current row, in cell B4, and you can see it's just a value. It's just typed in. Right now it's set at 5. Then I have max rows, right? And the way I built max rows, and I'll build it over here temporarily, is by using the rows function, and then the array would be participants. You can see it comes right up, and that gives you 100. That tells you that in that range participant there are 100 rows. And then using the index function, I have the corresponding ID that matches to this particular row in the participant's dynamic name range. So again, I'll just build it over here to show you how I did it. It's index, and then the array would be participants. The row number would be cell B4, and the column number would be 1. So as I changed the row, like say I changed it to 8, you can see that the ID number changes as well. So I'll delete the example I put in. And then in cell A1, this is populated from cell C4, so it's just equals C4. And then another index, and this is an index match combination to return the pretest score, and index match to return the post-test score. And again, I have a separate video on using index and match together to complete these functions. So next we're going to go to the coding environment, and that's Alt F11. You can see I have the other form here. This is what it looks like in this format when you're building it. And you want to make sure the toolbox is open, the icon right next to the question mark at the top. So I'm going to create a new user form. Right, so it'll be insert user form. So this is what it looks like by default. I'm going to name this user form. There's the properties over here on the left. I'm going to name this one main form 2 because I already have a main form. And the caption I'm just going to name main form 2. So notice the object name is different than the caption name. In the caption name you can have spaces, in the object name you cannot. And for the font for this user form, I'm going to change to the APA style font, Times New Roman 12. Of course that's not required, I just like to do that. And the background, which is called back color, you can see it's set to this light gray. I'm going to set it to, say, blue. All right, so this will be our new user form. So first we're going to need a couple labels. You saw I had those on the other form, ID and pretest. So you want to select label, and you can't see in there most likely because the font is black. So you want to change the for color down here to white. Now you can see it says label 1, which of course is not what you want it to read. In the caption we'll just change that to ID number. And just to save time, I'm going to copy and paste. And this of course will be label 2. Try to line this up. Alright, I'll change that to pretest. So we have our labels, ID and pretest. Now the data is actually displayed in what's called a text box. You could actually have the data in a label as well. It's a little easier to read in a text box. So I'm going to place a text box under ID, and again, just keep everything the same size, even though you can manually set the properties over here so they would be the same size. I'm going to copy and paste two identical text boxes. Notice by default they are named text box 1 and text box 2. And the last objects that we need to place are the actual command buttons, and it's actually referred to as a command button. It's down here in the third row of the toolbox. So I'm going to place one right about here. I may make it a little larger. And again, I'm going to just copy and paste so I get the same size. And I'm going to leave the names. I'm going to leave the names as command button 1 and command button 2. But I'm going to change the caption. So this one here is command button 2. So this will be next, and command button 1 will be previous. So I've set up the form the way that we'll need it. We have all the components on the actual user form. Of course, none of these items work yet. They don't do what we want them to do. It'll take some coding to accomplish that goal. So we first need to add a subroutine that allows us to open this user form. So I'm going to double click on sheet 1 data. Right, you can see here's the other subroutine for the other form. So I'm going to call the sub open form 2, and it'll just be main form 2 dot show, just like the other one. And then going back to, now remembering this name, right, this is open form 2, going back to the actual worksheet, you can see I have the rectangle that brings up this form, main form. I'm going to create another rectangle from shapes, and let's just make this one green. So this will open up the new user form that I'm creating. Just have to assign macro and select Open Form 2 and click OK. So now if I click on this, it should open the new user form. And of course it does, but again, nothing's been programmed yet, so this is all you have at this point. So let's move back to the code view, and we're going to want this to add some code so that this operates correctly. We're going to view the code for main form 2, and you can see because I double clicked on the command buttons, there's already a subroutine started for each command button and one for the label as well. Delete that. But first we're going to add a subroutine that will run every time the user form is opened. It's called Initialize. So we'll want to select user form and then over here Initialize. Now, of course it creates this extra one here. I'm just going to delete. So in user form Initialize, I'm going to bring in the current values to the text box 1 and text box 2. So let's start there. So we'll start with text box 1 value equals, and the first one is going to be sheets storage, which is the worksheet, and then the range is going to be C4, and I'll show you where that refers to. So notice that I typed in text box 1 all lowercase, but it automatically finds that object and changes it to the correct uppercase and lowercase. So text box 1 is going to load C4. So if we look at storage C4, we can see that that should bring in right now 1008. So that's the ID number. So moving back to the code view, of course we want a value for text box 2. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy and paste my first line. Now that's not always a good idea because sometimes you forget to change things, but it can make producing these lines of code a lot quicker, especially when you have all this to type. So I'm going to change text box 1 to text box 2, and then of course C4 I'm going to change to B1. Right, that would be pretest. So I go back here, you can see that's the pretest values in B1. So private sub user form initialize, whatever you put in here will run when the user form is opened. So if I go back to data, and remember this is the old user form, this is the new one, the green button, you can see it does populate the values, 1008 and the corresponding value of 51. Going back to the code, now for command button 1 and command button 2, so command button 1 was previous, command button 2 next. I need to enter code in here that, so when a user clicks previous, it'll bring up the previous record, and code here that when they click next, it'll bring up the next record. So what we'll want to do first is declare a variable that I'm going to use. You could do this without a variable, but I'm going to declare a variable here, and it's just going to be n, so it's dim n as integer. All right, so that declares it. You could also use a double here or any variety of declarations, but integer should be plenty for most applications in counseling research. So here's where we have to think through a little bit about the consequences of using the previous button. For the most part, it's fairly straightforward. When we click previous, we want the previous record to appear, but we have to be sensitive to the fact that eventually we're going to reach the beginning of the data set, and we don't want to throw an error. So we want to have a check to see where the value is so that the subroutine will know when to move to the previous record and when to stop. Right? So we'll use an if then else statement here. So we'll start with if, and there'll be sheets, storage, range B4 is greater than 1, then we'll have n equal that same value, right? So sheets, storage, range B4, except we're going to put a -1. So n is going to equal that value minus 1. So actually I'm going to change that to a capital S. Okay. So I'm going to just copy this part. All right, so it'll come in handy for the next line, because here I'm just going to have this equal n. Again, there's other ways to do this, but I think this is the clearest to show you how this actually works. Now I'm going to have to use another subroutine here, but I'm going to wait on that a second. So I'm going to put the else, and then we're going to add a message box. So I'm going to put a tab here and here to make it a little easier to read, and I'm going to tab in for the message box as well. So message box, and in quotation marks, no previous record. And very important with this if then else is you have to end it. So end if. So you can see here that if the value in B4, right, which is the row number, is greater than 1, then we're going to subtract 1. If it's not, it's just going to display a message box that says no previous record. That's how the if then else works. But of course there's no updating in this particular subroutine. We're not updating the values. I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. So next, let me build out the other command button. So this command button, of course, is similar. It just has the opposite problem. You're worried about the high end, like somebody trying to exceed the number of records rather than go below the number of records. So again, I'm just going to use n, and we're going to start with if. Now, of course, I already have this copied, so if B4 in this case is less than, I'm going to paste in B4. I'm going to change it to B5. What you might remember is the max number of rows. Right, so if the current number of rows is less than the max number of rows, then we want to continue with the subroutine as intended. So it'll be n equals, again I'm pasting this, but sheet storage range B4, in this case plus 1, and then sheet storage B4 will set to equal n. Again, we'll need an update here, which I'm not putting in yet, but I will put in a few minutes. And then for the else, we'll have a message box again, except this time it'll say no next record. And then end if. Alright, so now I'm going to build another subroutine that's going to update the values that you see in the actual text boxes. This will update the storage worksheet, but it won't actually affect what you see on the user form. So we'll call this one update. And it's going to be fairly straightforward. Text box 1 is going to equal, in this case, range A1. Okay, so I'm going to change that to A1. And we know text box 2, of course, will equal to B1, so I'm going to copy this whole thing. Again, be careful when doing this to make sure you change everything that you want to change. Text box 2 to B1. And there's one more thing you need to do. So when you're using this statement here, like when this is activated, when the button's doing what it would normally do, and you're not trying to go below the lowest record or greater than the highest record, you need to call the update function to run. Now you could also just take these 2 lines of code and place them right in here, but you'd have to do so in each command button. Now with 2 command buttons, that's not that difficult, but I think this is a good lesson to learn about how to call one subroutine from another. And actually it's very straightforward. It's the word call and then the subroutine. So call update, and then over here call update. So again, with 2 command buttons, it's not a tremendous amount of time saving, but when you have, say, 10 or 20 different buttons, this is a real time saving method. So now let's go back to the worksheet, and we can see that we have this, where it was 1008. 1008 is the participant ID, and the pretest course is 51. And if we hit previous, you can see it updates, and when we get to 1001, we'd expect it to come up with no previous record. Now I could also hit next all the way out until the last record, but I'm going to close this and just take a quick shortcut here and change this value to 99. Alright, and I'm going to reload it just to save time. So it's 1099, then you have 1100, then you have no next record. I hope this video on configuring previous and next command buttons on user forms in Excel was helpful to you. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to assist you.